The floorboard in the hallway, the one just outside the dining room, has a very specific quiet creak. I've known about it for 40 years. I know how to step over it, how to place my weight on the outer edge of my foot to avoid making a sound. It's a piece of knowledge, like so many others in this house, that belongs only to me. So I stood there, in the shadow of the doorway, perfectly silent and perfectly unseen. They thought I was at a doctor's appointment. A checkup for the heart they all assume is as weak as the man they think I am. The scent of Chloe's expensive perfume. Something sharp and floral, fought with the familiar, comforting smell of old wood and lemon polish. It was a losing battle. Mark was holding court, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear. He was in his element, the slick hedge fund manager, talking numbers and potential. His voice was a low, confident drone, but I caught every word. No, the structure is solid, he was saying, pacing slowly on the Persian rug my wife, their mother, had picked out on a trip to Istanbul a lifetime ago. Post-renovation, we are looking at a completely different valuation. The land alone, yes, exactly. Once it's liquidated, it'll be a clean slate. Liquidated. He said it so casually, as if he were talking about a failing company, a stock portfolio that had outlived its usefulness. Not the home he grew up in, not the walls that held his childhood laughter, the floor where he took his first steps. He was discussing the dissection of my life, and he might as well have been ordering lunch. Chloe was perched on the arm of my favorite reading chair, her nose slightly wrinkled as she ran a finger over the fabric. God, it's all so depressing, she announced to the room, her voice a carrying, theatrical sigh. This whole aesthetic, it's like a museum of sadness. I can't wait to get a team in here. Just gut the place. Start fresh. Maybe a minimalist palette. Whites, grays, something that doesn't smell like, well, like him. She didn't say dad. She said him. An object, a problem to be solved by interior design. I looked at the chair she was defiling. I could still see Sarah sitting there, a book in her lap, a soft smile on her face. Chloe saw only an eyesore. And then there was Jason, my youngest, the one with a new can't-fail business plan every 6 months, each one funded by a little more of the patience and resources I was presumed to have so little of. He was leaning against the fireplace mantel, a smirk playing on his lips. I'm telling you, he chuckled, the sound hollow and ugly in the quiet room. The only thing of any actual value the old man ever managed to hold on to is the dirt this house is sitting on, his whole life. And this is the pinnacle, this property. The air left my lungs. It wasn't the cruelty of it, though that was a cold knife twisting in my gut. It was the absolute, unshakable certainty in his voice. He genuinely believed that. He looked at the lifetime of memories contained within these walls. The Christmases, the birthdays, the quiet evenings, the love that built this family. And he saw a failed business venture. A man who had amounted to nothing more than a plot of land. They spoke of me in the past tense. Was, had, did, as if I were already a ghost. A story to be concluded. A burden they were days away from finally, mercifully lifting from their shoulders. Their voices, a trio of avarice and contempt, wove together in a symphony of betrayal. Mark's cold calculation, Chloe's dismissive vanity, Jason's mocking disrespect. They didn't see a father standing in the doorway. They didn't see the man who worked 3 jobs to put Mark through business school, who sat through every one of Chloe's painfully bad high school art shows, who bailed Jason out of trouble more times than I could count. They saw an old broke man, a simple equation, and they saw his assets. I stood there for a full minute longer, listening. I let their words wash over me, not with the hurt of a father, but with the cold, analytical focus of a strategist assessing his opponents. I identified their weaknesses, their tells. Mark's greed made him arrogant. Chloe's superficiality made her blind. Jason's laziness made him foolish. They were so sure of themselves, so confident in their victory over a feeble old man. They never once looked toward the doorway. They never saw the shadow. They never saw me. And in that moment, as I took a silent step back, retreating into the dim hall, the game, unbeknownst to them, had already begun. To my children, I am Arthur Vance, the ghost of a man, a retired, simple soul living out his twilight years on a modest pension that barely covers the property taxes on this old house. They see the worn-out cardigan, the slow shuffle to get the morning paper, the way I sometimes stare into the middle distance, as if I've lost the thread of a conversation. They think it's age. They think it's grief. And in a way, they're right. The grief is real. Their mother, Eleanor, was the sun in my sky. And when she left this world 5 years ago, a permanent twilight fell over my life. I withdrew. I let the vibrant, sharp-edged man I used to be recede into the background until all that was left was this quiet, unassuming shell. It was easier that way, less complicated. But the man they see is a carefully constructed facade, a piece of strategic theater I maintain for their benefit. The truth is, I was Arthur, the architect, once. I didn't just design buildings, I engineered destinies. In the glass and steel canyons of this city and in boardrooms from Zurich to Singapore, I built and broke corporate empires. I was a strategist, a grandmaster in a game where the pieces were companies and the prize was market dominance. A hostile takeover wasn't a battle, it was a symphony of pressure, leverage, and psychological warfare. And I was its conductor. I remember one particular Friday afternoon, staring down the CEO of a Fortune 500 company across a polished mahogany table. He was spitting mad, red-faced, threatening litigation to the heavens. I didn't raise my voice. I simply slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It contained 3 numbers. The coordinates of a bank account in the Cayman Islands, the balance it held, and the date his own chairman had opened it. The fight went out of him then. He just deflated. That was the power I wielded. It wasn't about the money. It was about the control, the exquisite satisfaction of seeing a complex plan click into its final, devastating place. I retired not because I lost my edge, not because I was pushed out, but because I won. I had accumulated more wealth than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, hidden away in a labyrinth of trusts, shell corporations, and numbered accounts so complex that only 2 people on earth fully understood its architecture: myself and a reclusive, brilliantly paranoid Swiss banker who communicates solely through encrypted channels. But the game lost its taste. The thrill of the hunt was replaced by a hollow echo. The victories felt empty. Eleanor was the only one who ever understood that. She was the anchor that kept the real me, the man beneath the architect, from floating away into the cold void of pure calculation. After she was gone, the thought of returning to that world, of playing those games, made me feel physically ill. So I walked away. I locked the architect in a box and buried him deep, and I let Arthur Vance, the simple retiree, take the stage. And he has been a fascinating character to play. I watch my children now with a clinical detachment I once reserved for rival corporations. Mark, with his hedge fund swagger, sees my frugality as a sign of failure. He doesn't see the strategic patience in it. Chloe, with her artist's eye, looks at my worn furniture and sees poor taste, not the comfort of familiar, loved objects. Jason, the eternal optimist with a new, sure thing every month, sees a man who never took a risk, not a man who calculated risks for a living and found the greatest risk of all was in trusting people. They are so sure of their assessment. They are so confident in their superiority. And that, I have learned, is the greatest weakness of all. Certainty. The only one who doesn't treat me like a simpleton or a burden is Leo, my adopted son, the one they dismiss as just a mechanic. They see grease under his fingernails and think it's a lack of ambition. They don't see the precision in his work, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the profound loyalty in his heart. He is the only one who ever looked at me and saw a person, not a pension or a potential inheritance. He doesn't know the full truth, of course. He knows I'm not destitute. He's seen glimpses, an old faded photograph of me with a business titan on the cover of a magazine I thought I'd thrown out. The way I sometimes slip and use a turn of phrase that belongs in a corporate war room, not a suburban living room. He never pries. He just accepts. He fixes my leaky faucet, not because he thinks I'm incapable, but because it's a way to show he cares. In his simple, profound decency, he's worth more than all the hidden billions in the world. And he is the only one who will ever know what it truly means to be my son. The others are merely auditing the role, waiting for the final curtain call so they can raid the set. The shift was subtle at first, like a change in the barometric pressure before a storm. The condescending remarks, the sighs of pity, the way they talk over me as if I weren't in the room. That was the old normal. But then the planning started. It was no longer just about what they would do when I was gone. It became about how they could accelerate the process. It was Mark who brought the papers over. He came on a Tuesday, dressed in a suit that cost more than my first car, smelling of expensive cologne and ambition. He didn't call it a reverse mortgage right away. No, he called it a financial security product. He laid the documents out on my kitchen table, the one your mother picked out 40 years ago, smoothing them down with a practiced hand. "Look, Dad," he said, his voice a carefully modulated blend of concern and authority. "With your pension being what it is, and the property taxes on this place only going up, this is just a smart move. It unlocks the equity you've built up. It's for your own security." I let my eyes go, a little unfocused, let my hand tremble just slightly as I reached for my reading glasses. I made a show of peering at the dense, small print. To him, I was just an old man struggling to comprehend. To me, it was a blueprint of his avarice. He was trying to mortgage my home out from under me, to turn my greatest tangible asset into a liquid cash pile for them to divvy up, all while leaving me with the debt. The sheer elegant cruelty of it was almost impressive. That was the opening gambit. The probing attacks came next. Chloe started her helping sessions. She'd come over, all perfume and false cheer, and declare it was time to tidy up. But her tidying had a specific focus. She'd open drawers I hadn't touched in years, run her fingers along the top shelves of closets, and casually ask questions that were anything but casual. Did Mom ever have any good jewelry, Dad? You know, besides her wedding ring? It would be a shame if something valuable was just tucked away somewhere, forgotten. Or, you were so successful back in the day, Dad. You must have some more bonds or stock certificates lying around. We should make sure everything is accounted for. She wasn't looking for memories. She was taking inventory. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, missed nothing. She was valuing every piece of furniture, every knick-knack, mentally tagging them for her future estate sale. Then came the power of attorney. Jason, of all people, brought it up. He, who couldn't hold on to a job for more than 6 months, had the audacity to tell me I needed someone to manage my affairs. It's just to make things easier, Pop, he said, slapping me on the back a little too hard. You shouldn't have to worry about bills and taxes and all that boring stuff. Let us handle the headaches for you. Their visits, which had once been sporadic and dutiful, became regular, almost militant. They were interrogations disguised as family time. The questions were always the same, just phrased differently. Have you given any more thought to your will, Dad? Are your affairs in order? You know, we just want what's best for you, right? The air in my own home grew thick with their unspoken desire. They didn't see a father. They saw a lockbox, and they were trying every key they could think of. And through it all, there was Leo. He would show up on Saturdays, not with papers or probing questions, but with a toolbox and a 6-pack of the root beer I like. He wouldn't ring the bell. He'd just come in through the side gate and get to work. I'd hear the clink of his wrench under the kitchen sink, fixing the drip that had been annoying me for weeks. I'd look out the window and see him with the hood of my old sedan up, checking the oil, topping over the fluids. He'd finish his work, wash his hands at the outdoor spigot, and come inside. Need anything from the store, Dad? He'd ask, his voice quiet and steady. I'm heading over there anyway. That was it. No agenda, no calculation. Just presence. Just service. And my other children, they would sneer. They couldn't help themselves. Mark would see Leo's old truck in the driveway and make a comment about finally getting a real vehicle. Chloe would look at his grease-stained hands and ask, with fake sweetness, if he'd ever thought about going back to school for something more professional. Jason would offer him unsolicited advice on monetizing his skill set. Leo would just nod, a small, patient smile on his face, and never engage. He took their scorn like a tree takes the wind. He bent, but he never broke. He was the still, quiet center of the hurricane they were trying to create around me. And with every turn of his wrench, with every quiet offer to run an errand, he was silently, steadfastly building a case against them that no lawyer could ever draft. He was proving his worth, not in words, but in actions, while they proved their worthlessness with every greedy, grasping word they spoke. They called it a family meeting. The phrase itself felt like a violation, a hollowed-out shell of what it was supposed to mean. They'd summoned me to the dining room, the same room where, not so long ago, I'd overheard them speaking of me as a ghost. Now they sat facing me, a tribunal of my own flesh and blood. Mark, Chloe, and Jason. An unholy trinity of avarice. Mark started. Of course he did. He's always been the one who believes spreadsheets are a substitute for a soul. He opened his laptop with a crisp, authoritative click, the sound of a gavel falling. The screen glowed, casting a pale, sickly light on his satisfied face. "Dad," he began, his voice a practiced blend of condescension and false concern. "We've been worried. We've put our heads together, and we've come up with a solution. A real plan for your future." He turned the screen toward me. It was a spreadsheet, all right. Rows and columns, numbers and projections. It was a cold, calculated blueprint for my dismantling. My eyes, which they think are weak and fading, scanned the headings. Projected sale price of property. Estimated monthly cost of state-funded care facility. Division of proceeds. He talked about square footage and market trends, about liquidating assets and streamlining my life. He used words like efficient and practical, but what he was describing was a demolition. The plan was to sell my home, the house where I raised them, where their mother took her last breath, and to place me in what he so delicately called a cost-effective, state-funded care facility. He might as well have said warehouse. And then the kicker, the part that made his eyes gleam. The split of the proceeds. 3 ways. An equal share for him, for Chloe, for Jason. I let my gaze drift from the screen, this digital epitaph they'd written for me. I looked at Chloe. She was nodding, a slow, deliberate motion, as if Mark were revealing the secrets of the universe. "It just makes sense, Daddy," she said, her voice a saccharine drip. "This house is so much for you to manage. and all that money tied up in it. Think of the freedom. For all of us. She leaned forward, a conspiratorial whisper. I've already seen the most gorgeous villa in Tuscany. This could finally be my year. Then Jason. He wasn't even listening to the details of my incarceration. His eyes were glazed over, a small, private smile on his lips. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the phantom businesses he would start and inevitably fail with his newfound windfall. His share wasn't my life's work being sold off. It was a lottery ticket. They presented it not as a suggestion, but as a done deal. The paperwork, Mark assured me, was being drawn up. They just needed my signature. A formality. The three of them looked at me, a united front. They saw an old man, overwhelmed, defeated. They saw a problem they were finally solving. And that's when I let my eyes find Leo. He was sitting in the corner in a simple wooden chair he'd pulled away from the table. He'd been silent the entire time, his large, capable hands resting on his knees. They hadn't even included him in their division of proceeds. He was part of the furniture to them, the help, the simple mechanic. I looked at him, and he met my gaze. And in his eyes I saw it. I saw the entire tragic story of this family meeting reflected back at me. There was no greed there, no calculation. There was a profound, bottomless sadness. Sadness for me. Sadness for the ugly spectacle his siblings had become. And beneath that sadness, like a banked coal, a flicker of protective anger. Not for himself, for me. In that single, silent exchange, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a crack or a break, it was a click. A precise, final, and irrevocable click, like the sound of a well-made lock sliding home. The test was over. For months, I had played the part of the frail, broke old man. I had let their insults wash over me. I had absorbed their condescension. I had noted every greedy glance, every avaricious whisper. I had been observing, gathering data, assessing their characters. And they had failed. Spectacularly. The persona of Arthur Vance, the retired simple man, began to recede like a tide going out. And what was left on the shore was the bedrock. The mind that hadn't just built skyscrapers, but had engineered corporate takeovers. The strategist who had built and broken empires in the soundproofed boardrooms of the world. The man they nicknamed the architect. He had been sleeping, lulled by retirement and grief. But now he was waking up. The grogginess of age and disappointment fell away, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. They thought they were architects of my future, drawing up their little blueprints for my demise. They had no idea they were merely temporary tenants in a structure I was about to bring down around their ears. The decision was made. It was no longer a question of if, but how. And as I looked from Mark's smug spreadsheet to Leo's sorrowful, loyal eyes, the first lines of the final blueprint began to etch themselves into my mind. Cold, surgical, perfect. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time since that family meeting, the air in my study felt clean. It was my air. It smelled of old leather and the faint, sweet scent of the beeswax I still used on the desk. Their voices, their plans, their utter contempt. It was all muffled by the thick oak door. I was alone. My fingers, these old, veined things, traced the grain of the roll-top desk. It wasn't an antique to me. It was a companion. I'd bought it 40 years ago, a reward to myself after the first really big deal. The lock was a simple brass mechanism, but it had held my secrets for decades. I didn't need to open it now. Just touching it was like plugging into a power source I'd sworn off. Because my mind, it wasn't the mind of the man they saw. The one who shuffled in slippers, who pretended not to understand the financial news, who let them talk down to him. That man was a fiction, a character I'd been playing for their benefit. Number. The mind that was now stirring, stretching its long dormant muscles, was the mind of Arthur, the architect Vance. The name came back to me, not as a boast, but as a simple operational fact. I didn't just build skyscrapers of glass and steel. I built empires of influence and capital. I engineered corporate takeovers so elegant and ruthless that competitors would wake up one morning to find their company was no longer theirs. I was a strategist, a planner. I saw patterns in chaos and weaknesses in fortresses of pride. I retired not because I was beaten, but because I had won everything there was to win, and the victory had turned to ash in my mouth. The game was empty, so I left it all, created the fiction of Arthur Vance, the simple pension-bound widower, and I had almost started to believe it myself. Their greed had woken the ghost, and a ghost, once summoned, does not go quietly. A plan began to form, not in a hot rush of anger, but with a cold, surgical precision that felt more familiar to me than my own heartbeat. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion, and it makes you sloppy. This was about justice. It was about legacy. Their mother, Eleanor, she was my heart. She was kindness and light. And these creatures, were the product of our love. They were a perversion of her memory. I had a duty to her and to myself to set things right, to ensure that the true legacy of our lives, the legacy of character, not currency, was honored. And the beautiful, terrible irony was that I wouldn't have to lift a finger against them. Not really. I would simply give them exactly what they wanted, and in doing so hand them the rope to hang themselves. Their own greed would be the weapon. It was their fatal flaw, their glaring, unguarded weakness. They were so blinded by it. They couldn't see the trap being laid right in front of them. I would let them believe their greatest victory was at hand. I would let them taste it. I would let them plan their European vacations and their new business ventures and their lavish home renovations with my money. I would let them grow fat and happy and, most importantly, overconfident. Because that is when any opponent is at their most vulnerable. When they think they've already won. The principles came back to me as clearly as if I were in a boardroom, a schematic laid out on a vast table. A perfect corporate takeover. It's not a brawl. It's a ballet. First, you identify the core weakness. Check. Their avarice was a bottomless pit. They didn't want security. They wanted excess. They didn't want to care for their father. They wanted to cash him in. Second, you control the flow of information. They would see only what I wanted them to see. The defeated old man. The shaky signature. The confused packing. They would hear only the whispers I allowed to leak. They would believe they were the puppet masters, never realizing their strings were being pulled by a hand they thought was feeble. Third, and most critical, you strike at the moment of maximum vulnerability, when the deal is moments from being signed, when the champagne is metaphorically on ice, when their guards are down because they believe the battle is over. That is the moment you reveal that the battle never even started on the field. They thought they were playing on. I leaned back in my chair, the old leather groaning in a comfortable, familiar way. A faint, grim smile touched my lips. It had been so long since I'd flexed this part of my mind. It felt good. It felt right. They had looked at a sleeping lion and poked it with a stick, thinking it was a harmless, mangy cat. They were about to learn the difference. The architect was back, and he was about to build his final and most satisfying masterpiece, their ruin. The performance of a lifetime began the moment I walked out of that family meeting. The fire in my gut, the cold fury of the architect had to be buried under a mask of crumpled defeat. I let my shoulders slump a little more. I let a faint, confused tremor settle into my hands. I became the man they believed me to be. The first act was signing their papers. Mark presented the reverse mortgage documents with the slick, condescending smile of a man who thinks he's being charitable. It's just a formality, Dad. For your own security, I took the pen, my hand shaking just enough to be convincing. I made my signature a little shakier, a little less certain than the bold, decisive script I'd used to sign billion-dollar contracts. I saw the glance they exchanged, a mix of pity and triumph. They saw a broken old man capitulating. I saw pawns moving exactly where I needed them. Then came the packing. They descended on the house like vultures under the guise of helping me downsize. It was a grotesque spectacle of their true natures. Chloe would hold up a simple ceramic vase my wife had loved, her nose wrinkled. We can't possibly take this. It's so dated. She'd set it aside for the donation pile, not knowing it was a piece from a renowned potter I'd collected decades ago, worth more than the handbag she was clutching. Jason was worse, rifling through drawers looking for hidden cash or old bonds. He found a box of my old fountain pens. Probably worthless, he muttered, but I saw him slip one into his pocket. They bickered in hushed, venomous tones in the next room over a silver picture frame. Mark wanted to melt it down for its scrap value. Chloe insisted it was Art Deco, and she could get more selling it whole. I sat in my armchair, a blanket over my knees, and watched them pick my life apart for scraps. I said nothing. I just observed, cataloging every greedy word, every avaricious glance. They were writing their own indictment, and I was the silent stenographer. While they were busy with their pathetic treasure hunt, I was executing the second phase. I told them I had a routine checkup with a new geriatric specialist. A necessary lie. Instead, Leo drove me to a discreet, oak-paneled office in the financial district, a place I hadn't set foot in for over a decade. My lawyer, Eleanor Shaw, and my financial manager, Benjamin Croft, were waiting. They hadn't aged a day in spirit. They were still the sharp, ruthless professionals I trusted with my most sensitive affairs. There were no pleasantries. We got straight to business. It's time, I said, my voice no longer frail. It was the voice of Arthur Vance, the architect. Eleanor nodded, a grim smile on her face. The Legacy Protocol. The Legacy Protocol wasn't a single document. It was a series of interlocking legal and financial maneuvers I had designed years ago. A masterpiece of estate planning. It was my ultimate contingency, a fortress designed to protect my true legacy from exactly this kind of parasitic greed. Benjamin activated the financial structures, moving assets from dormant, numbered accounts into a new, ironclad trust. Eleanor began filing the pre-drafted codicils to my will and the powers of attorney that would render the one my children had tricked me into signing utterly null and void. We reviewed the evidence file, audio recordings of their family meetings, financial records showing their own instability, their desperate need for my money. We had them cold. The trap was being set with the precision of a master watchmaker. The third part of the counter-move was the most delicate. We had to make them believe they were winning. So, through a third-party corporate entity Eleanor controlled, we made an offer on the house. A generous offer, well above market value. The message was subtly fed to the realtor Mark was using. A developer was keen, wanted a quick, quiet close, no fuss. My children were ecstatic. Their scheming had paid off faster and more lucratively than they'd ever dreamed. The phone calls between them became celebratory. I'd hear Chloe through the floorboards, gushing to a friend about a villa in Tuscany. Jason was talking about finally getting his app idea off the ground. They were giddy, drunk on a victory they hadn't yet secured. They saw the finish line, but they didn't see the chasm I had dug just in front of it. The final piece was Leo. On the morning of the closing, I asked him, and only him, to drive me. I didn't need to explain why. He simply nodded, his calm, steady presence a stark contrast to the frenetic energy of the others. As we got into his clean, simple car, I placed a hand on his arm. Today, you say nothing, I instructed, my voice low and firm. You just watch. You observe everything. He met my gaze, and I saw the understanding there. He wasn't my driver, he was my witness. He was the living, breathing embodiment of the principle I was about to enforce. Sitting in the passenger seat as he drove, I looked out the window. The world outside was just going about its business, unaware of the small, personal war that was about to reach its conclusion. I felt a profound calm. The performance was over. The pretending was done. The final move was set on the board, and it was my turn to play. The air in the lawyer's office was thick, with the scent of polished mahogany, an unearned victory. Sunlight cut across the conference table, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the beams like tiny, frantic specks of greed. My 3 children, Mark, Chloe, and Jason, sat across from me, their postures relaxed, their faces masks of barely concealed triumph. They thought this was the finish line. Mark was already talking about a new investment property under his breath. Something with better returns. Chloe was scrolling through her phone, her thumb flicking across images of Italian villas. Jason kept grinning. A boy who just won the lottery without buying a ticket. They didn't see me. They saw the final obstacle being cleared. Leo sat quietly beside me, his hands resting on his knees. He hadn't said a word since we arrived. He was just here because I'd asked him to be. The lawyer, Miss Sterling, entered the room. She was a woman carved from granite and legal precedent. Her hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes the color of a winter sky. She didn't smile. She placed her briefcase on the table with a definitive click. My children leaned forward, expecting the thick stack of closing documents for the house sale. But Miss Sterling slid a single, crisp document into the center of the table. It wasn't multi-paged or bound. It was one sheet of heavy, expensive paper. "What's this?" Mark asked, his voice laced with impatience. "The deed summary?" Miss Sterling's gaze was level. "This," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "is the last will and testament of Arthur Vance, executed and notarized 3 days ago, revoking all previous versions." The room went still. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. Chloe's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table. Jason's grin froze, then slowly melted from his face. "I don't understand," Chloe said, a nervous laugh bubbling in her throat. "We're here for the house closing, not for this." "You will understand momentarily," Miss Sterling replied. She picked up the document and began to read. Her voice was calm, dispassionate, a scalpel making the first clean incision. She read the formalities, the revocations, and then she reached the heart of it. "I, Arthur Vance, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby bequeath my entire estate, including but not limited to all real property, financial assets held in any and all trusts, both domestic and international, securities, and all other worldly possessions, to my son, Leo Vance." A beat of silence. Then Mark snorted. "Leo? His adopted son? What assets? The house is the only asset," Miss Sterling continued, her voice cutting through his derision. "The aforementioned estate includes the property located at 1142 Willow Lane, the proceeds from its imminent sale, and the entirety of my previously undisclosed fortune." She paused, letting the words "previously undisclosed fortune" hang in the air. I watched their faces. Confusion first, then dawning comprehension. "The total value of the estate being transferred to Leo Vance, Miss Sterling said, looking directly at Mark, is approximately $478 million. The number didn't just suck the air from the room. It vaporized it. 478 million. It was a figure from a fantasy, a number so vast it made the value of this house, the price they had been salivating over, look like the contents of a forgotten piggy bank. Chloe made a small, strangled sound. Jason's mouth was hanging open. Mark's face had lost all its color, turning a sickly, waxy gray. Miss Sterling wasn't finished. She read the next clause, the one I had dictated with a cold, clear heart. To my biological children, Mark, Chloe, and Jason Vance, I leave the sum of $1 each. This bequest is made expressly so that they cannot claim to have been overlooked or forgotten in my final wishes. $1. The ultimate insult. Not nothing. A token so petty it screamed of deliberate, calculated contempt. The color that had drained from Mark's face came flooding back in a hot, angry rush. This is insane, he sputtered, shooting to his feet. He's not in his right mind. We have doctor's reports. This is coercion. We'll contest this. We'll take this to every court in the country. Mrs. Sterling didn't flinch. She placed the will back on the table and opened her briefcase. She withdrew a slim black digital recorder and placed it next to the will. The doctor's reports you refer to, Mr. Vance, were procured through bribery, a fact we have documented. As for coercion, she pressed play. My own voice, filtered through the speaker of my old reading lamp, filled the room. It was from the family meeting. Mark's voice, cold and clinical, laying out the spreadsheet for my consignment to a state facility. Chloe's voice, agreeing, talking about her vacation. Jason's, calculating his cut. Their words, their own greedy, dismissive words, echoed back at them in the sterile office. She stopped the recording. The silence was absolute. That is one of 17 such recordings, she said calmly. We also have sworn affidavits from the realtor you pressured. Bank records showing your attempts to access your father's accounts, and a detailed timeline of your collective campaign of financial coercion and emotional neglect. You have no legal standing, Mr. Vance. You have no case. Any judge would see this for what it is. She looked at each of them in turn, her smile a thin, bloodless line. You didn't defeat a frail old man, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You were outmaneuvered by the architect. The use of that old nickname, the one they never knew, was the final blow. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the realization that the man they had written off as a simple, broke pensioner had been playing a game they didn't even know was happening. He had seen every move, anticipated every greedy impulse, and had laid a trap they had walked into with their eyes wide open. They didn't look at me with anger then. They looked at me with something far worse, the dawning, horrifying understanding that they never knew me at all. They had been trying to cheat a ghost, and the ghost had been watching them the entire time. The sound that came out of Chloe was not human. It was a raw, wounded shriek of pure, undiluted fury, a sound that seemed to rip the very air in the plush, wood-paneled office to shreds. It was the sound of a spoiled child who had just been told the universe no longer revolved around her whims. "You planned this!" she screamed, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at me, her face a twisted mask of mascara-streaked rage. "You set us up! You pathetic, senile old man!" Mark was already on his feet, his face the color of old parchment. The cool, calculating hedge fund manager was gone, replaced by a sputtering, desperate boy. He turned on our lawyer, the formidable Miss Chen. "This is fraudulent. This is coercion. He's not of sound mind. We have doctors. We have witnesses. You'll be disbarred for this." He was practically vibrating, his expensive suit jacket straining at the shoulders. But Miss Chen didn't even flinch. She simply looked at him over the rim of her glasses, her expression one of profound, professional boredom. The competency evaluations, all three of them, conducted by leading geriatric psychiatrists, are in the file, Mr. Vance. Your father is, and has been, sharper than you or I. The only coercion documented here is yours. Then Jason, my youngest, found his voice. It was a whine, petulant and grating. $1? You're leaving me $1? After everything? I'm your son. My blood. He slammed his fist on the table, but the thick oak barely registered the impact. It was a feeble, meaningless gesture. And then, as if on some foul, unspoken cue, all three of them turned their venom on the one person in the room who had remained utterly still. "Leo, you," Mark hissed, the word dripping with contempt. "You did this. You manipulative little weasel. All those years playing the humble mechanic, fixing his gutters, changing his oil. You were just biding your time, weren't you? Playing the long game. You played the poor, loyal son perfectly." "You gold digger!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking. You're not even his real son. You're just some stray mom felt sorry for. This is our inheritance. Ours. The words hung in the air, ugly and toxic. Not even his real son. I felt a fresh wave of cold anger wash over me, so potent it was a physical chill. I looked at Leo. He hadn't moved. He stood beside my chair, his posture relaxed but firm, his work-roughened hand resting gently on my shoulder. He didn't look at them. He didn't defend himself. He didn't need to. He just absorbed their hatred, a silent bulwark against the storm. His presence a steady, calming pressure that grounded me. He took their abuse for me. He became their target, so I wouldn't have to bear the full force of their rage alone. In that moment, I saw the profound, unshakable strength of this man they so carelessly dismissed. He was the rock upon their waves of hysteria, crashed and dissipated. Miss Chen gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the two security guards who had been standing by the door. They moved with quiet efficiency, their faces neutral. "I think it's time for you to leave," one of them said, his voice low but firm. There was more screaming, more flailing, more pathetic attempts to grab the documents on the table. Mark was shouting about his lawyers, about appeals, about destroying us. Chloe was sobbing, great heaving sobs of theatrical despair. Jason was just repeating $1 over and over, as if the words had broken his mind. But the guards were immovable. They herded them, these three entitled, shrieking phantoms of my former family, toward the door. The heavy oak door clicked shut. The silence that descended was absolute. It was thick and heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on the room. But it wasn't an empty silence. It wasn't the lonely quiet of my house these past few years. This was a different kind of quiet. It was the clean, resonant silence that follows a cataclysm. After the last rumble of thunder has faded and the rain has washed the world clean. The poison was gone. The air, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, was breathable. I let out a long, slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The tension in my neck and shoulders began to uncoil. I felt every one of my 78 years in that moment, not as a burden, but as a simple, undeniable fact. Then Leo moved. He didn't look at the stack of papers that detailed a fortune beyond his wildest dreams. He didn't glance at the legal document that had just rewritten his future. He turned to me, his brow furrowed not with greed or triumph, but with a deep, genuine concern. He knelt slightly, bringing his eyes level with mine. His own eyes, the same warm brown as his mother's, searched my face. "Are you okay, Dad?" he asked. 2 words, 5 simple syllables. But in them, I heard a lifetime of love, of quiet devotion, of a bond that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. He wasn't asking if I was victorious. He wasn't asking about the money. He was asking if I was okay. After the ugliness, after the betrayal, after the emotional evisceration his siblings had just attempted, his only thought was for my well-being. And in that moment, something shifted deep inside me. A wall I didn't even know I had built. A layer of frost that had encased my heart since their mother died simply melted away. The title father had felt like a hollow label for years, a role I was failing at. But when Leo called me Dad with such unfeigned care, the word filled with meaning again. It was no longer a title, but a truth. A warmth spread through my chest, pushing out the last of the cold anger. I looked at my son, my real son, and for the first time in years I felt like a father. Not the architect, not Arthur Vance, the retired titan, just a dad whose son loved him. And that was the greatest fortune of all. The evening air is sweet here, carrying the scent of cut grass and the distant, happy shrieks of my granddaughter Lily chasing fireflies in the sprawling backyard. This porch is wide and deep, with a comfortable swing and chairs that invite you to sit and stay a while. From here, I can see the lights of Leo's garage glowing like a warm beacon a few hundred yards away. It's not just a garage. It's a temple. A beautiful, clean, state-of-the-art facility where he brings classic cars back to life. The low, throaty purr of a perfectly tuned engine is the soundtrack to our evenings now. A sound far more beautiful to me than any symphony. This house, this life, it's the antithesis of everything I endured in those final, bitter months in my old home. There, the air was thick with avarice and the quiet hum of calculation. Here, it's filled with the unforced music of a family. The smell of my daughter-in-law's cooking, the sound of Lily practicing her reading aloud, the comfortable silence between Leo and me as we watch the day fade. He bought this place not as a monument to wealth, but as a foundation for a life. He saw the land, the old barn he could convert, and the space for a child to run, and he knew. That's the man he is. He sees potential, not just price tags. He used the inheritance, yes, but he didn't squander it on fleeting luxuries or the hollow status symbols his siblings craved. He invested it in his hands, in his skill, in a dream he'd quietly nurtured since he was a boy, taking apart lawnmower engines. Vance Classic Restorations now has a waiting list 6 months long. CEOs and collectors trust him with their priceless Ferraris and Jaguars, not because he's the son of some mysterious wealthy man, but because he is a true artist with a wrench. I sometimes wander down there in the afternoons. The smell of high-octane fuel and clean motor oil, a familiar comfort. He'll look up from an engine block, his face smudged with grease, and his eyes will crinkle into a smile. "Hey, Dad, check this out." And he'll show me some intricate piece of machinery, explaining it with a passion I never heard from Mark. Explaining a multi-million-dollar merger. This is his empire. He built it himself. I just gave him the land to build it on. We sit on this porch every evening we can. He'll have a beer, I'll have an iced tea, and we'll talk about nothing and everything. The cars, Lily's school play, a book I'm reading. He never, not once, brings up the money. He never looks at me as a transaction, a payout, a means to an end. He looks at me as his dad. He asks for my advice on hiring a new mechanic, not on investing a dividend. He worries if I seem tired, if I've been getting enough rest. He restored an old, comfortable armchair for me and placed it in the prime spot on the porch, facing the sunset. It's in these quiet moments, with his quiet strength beside me, that I feel the last of the old chill, the residue of my other children's betrayal, finally thaw from my bones. As for them, well, the world has a way of balancing its books. I still skim the business section out of habit. I saw the piece about Mark's fund. Vance Capital collapses amidst investor flight and allegations of mismanagement. The article was dry, full of financial jargon, but it told a simple story. A house of cards, built on arrogance and leverage, meeting a gentle breeze. I felt a profound and total nothingness as I read it. No schadenfreude, no pity, just the hollow recognition of an inevitable outcome. A life built on the shifting sands of other people's perceived value cannot stand. His foundation was always rotten. Chloe's gallery I heard through the old, dusty grapevine shuttered. The social circle that flocked to her when she was the daughter of a soon-to-be rich man evaporated the moment the money did. And Jason, his latest sure thing startup, apparently never got off the ground. They tried to sue, of course. A frantic, messy, and ultimately futile legal battle. My lawyer, the formidable Miss Scable, dismantled their case with the serene efficiency of a master chess player checkmating a novice. They had no evidence, only entitlement. Their lives, which they were so eager to fund with my corpse, have begun the slow, public crumble they so desperately wanted to avoid. But their noise is a distant echo now, a faint static from a radio station I no longer tune into. When I look out from this porch, I don't see their crumbling worlds. I see my son's dream lit up against the twilight. I hear my granddaughter's laughter rolling across the lawn. I feel the simple, solid presence of family. This is the true inheritance. Not the money, but the peace. Not the power, but the love. My family, my real family, is right here. Looking back now, from the quiet comfort of this porch swing, with the sound of my granddaughter's laughter drifting from the yard, I see the whole painful, necessary journey with a clarity that was impossible in the thick of it. People spend their whole lives chasing a number in a bank account, a figure they believe will grant them security, power, and peace. I was one of them for decades. I built empires on paper, amassed fortunes that could last 10 lifetimes, and believed, truly believed, that this was the scorecard of a life well lived. But I was wrong. So profoundly wrong. Wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's a lesson I had to learn the hardest way possible. It's who you have by your side when you have nothing. When the world thinks you're broke, when the vultures are circling. That's when you find out who your real treasures are. For me, that treasure was a single person. My son, Leo. Not the children who shared my DNA, who had every advantage, but the quiet, kind soul who saw a person, not a portfolio. I pretended to be poor for a reason. It wasn't a game, not really. It was the ultimate test. I needed to see the true character of my children, stripped bare of the influence of my money. I had to know if the love and respect they showed me was for me, Arthur, the father, or for Arthur, the bank. And what I found broke my heart, even as it confirmed my deepest fears. I found that blood is not always thicker than water. That old saying is a comfort we tell ourselves, a myth we cling to. But the cold, hard truth I learned is that loyalty is thicker than both. Loyalty isn't an accident of birth. It's a conscious, daily choice. It's showing up with a toolkit to fix a leaky faucet when everyone else is showing up with a spreadsheet to liquidate your life. Remember this, and I beg you to take this to heart. The true measure of a person is not how they treat you when you're on top of the world. Anyone can smile at you when you're holding the trophy. Anyone can laugh at your jokes when you're signing the checks. The real test, the only test that matters, is how they treat you when they think you're at the bottom of it. When they believe you have nothing left to give them but your time and your love. Do they still give you theirs? Or do their eyes glaze over? Do their visits become less frequent? Do their conversations become about what they can get rather than what they can give? I saw my children's true measures in the way Mark's voice tightened when he talked about my modest pension, in the way Chloe's nose would wrinkle at my depressing furniture, in the way Jason's laughter echoed in my dining room as he dismissed my entire life's work. Their measure was taken in teaspoons of condescension and gallons of greed. And Leo's measure? His was taken in silent support, in a hand on my shoulder, in the simple, profound question, "Are you okay, Dad?" He valued me, not my possessions, not my past, but the man sitting in front of him. So, my final lesson, the moral of this entire painful story, is this: value those who value you. It sounds simple, almost childish, but it is the most complex and important calculation you will ever make. Look around you. Look at the people in your life. Who is there for the parties? And who is there for the quiet Tuesday evenings? Who asks what you need? And who tells you what they want? Your time, your energy, your love. These are your most finite and precious resources. Do not waste them on those who see you as a stepping stone or an ATM. Invest them in the Leos of the world. Invest them in the people who see your heart, not your net worth. Because in the end, when the lawyers are gone and the papers are signed and the money is just a number in an account, all you are left with is the echo of the laughter from the yard and the solid, unwavering presence of the person who chose to stay. That is the only wealth that truly matters. That is the legacy worth building.